Welcome to 2026, guys. It's our first episode back in 2026. We had a well-deserved break towards the end of 2025, and now we're back to bring you even more episodes, even better episodes, even bigger episodes in 2026. I'm back today with my co-host Alex, and I'm thrilled, I'm infused for the year ahead, and what's in store for us. Before we go into kind of this episode, is there anything, Alex, that you kind of wanted to say to our guests before we kind of intro what the plan is for this episode?
To our guests, to our listeners.
To our listeners,
yeah.
Our guests.
Yeah. No, thank you for 2025. It was a really good year. When we started the Compliance Chronicles, we said from the beginning, if we got a few hundred views in an episode, it would be amazing. We said, if a few people start to follow us, a few people subscribe, that would be really good. We don't know who's going to watch it, and then the feedback's just been great. The comments from people, the conversations we've had, the amount of people that want to come on as guests. I wasn't expecting it, because it's compliance, as we always say, is not the sexiest subject in the world. So the fact that we've managed to take what is potentially, not the most interesting topic for people to discuss and find a way of making it, fairly enjoyable to listen to, has been amazing. And we broke several our own records, I'll say. We broke several records in 2025. And yeah, I'm excited for 2026 with the people we've been speaking to already, some of the guests we've got coming on over the next couple of months. It's going to be good.
Yeah. I think that's probably what I'm most proud about is the fact that, one, we made it through a whole year in terms of people who actually stayed tuned to what we've been delivering in over that year in 2025. People have actually reached out and said, actually, you've made compliance simpler. You've made compliance more relevant and actually quite enjoyable to talk about. So that was something I've been specifically proud about.
One thing. Oh, let me just say one thing that makes me laugh is that obviously I like speaking on panels and attending events. Now, whenever I get asked to speak on an event or at a conference, I always get asked, "Oh, will Ray be joining you?" So it's like I can't just speak anymore. It's like, right, we've got to be a double
act deck now, isn't it?
Yeah, which I found quite funny. Like people just say, "Oh yeah, is Ray going to join you? Is Ray going to join you?" It's like, well, why? Am I not good enough on my own anymore?
Yeah,
but that's been quite good.
Listen, I have, and I'm sure you have, and we have had the messages through our social media channels asking us, when our next episode is, what's the next topic, and of course, like I said, we were away for a period of time towards the end of the year, last few weeks, and so that's something that's I'm really proud about. That actually, people are interested to find out what's coming next, and like I said, 2026, we're planning for bigger and better. Again, we are thrilled that we've had new sponsorship for this year. So we have many plans ahead, and just stay tuned for that. Stay tuned to be a part of what we have in store. So this episode, what we are doing, seeing as we are marking our 1 year anniversary, is looking back actually at one of our first episodes where we made some really, really bold predictions for what we expected or what we thought would happen in the compliance space in 2025. We put our reputations on the line with some of these predictions. So this episode is a bit of a accountability piece, looking back and seeing actually what happened. Did what we predict happen? If so, why did it happen? If it didn't happen, potentially why didn't it happen? If it did happen, but to a slower degree or slower pace than what we had expected, again, talking through some of those points. So that's what the plan is for this episode. So I think we had four predictions. You made 2, Alex. I made 2. So what we will do is going to go through those 4 predictions and talk them out, and seeing actually kind of what the reality is.
What lessons were learned?
What lessons could be learned? What potentially, like I said, were the reasons why things didn't happen, and really seeing how close we were to the mark, but really driving that based on evidence. What actually happened? What happened in regulation? What happened in industries? What happened in government? What happened in legislation? So that's what we will be talking through today. So as a recap, because I forgot, I'm going to recap the 4 predictions that we made. and we'll go through them and, yeah, like I said, talk them through. So the first prediction was proliferation financing would move from theory to scrutiny. So essentially, the requirements or expectations around proliferation financing, what it means, the risks, would go from just a update in your policy to actually an understanding of your controls and actually how your business, your firm, is directly or indirectly impacted by the risk of proliferation financing. So that was one. Then there was the next one was AI compliance and the adoption of AI and potentially how the growth of the utilization of AI would move fast and actually regulators could regulate the use of it. And then one after that was a prediction again you made, Alex, which was around consumer duty and the requirements around consumer duty expectations, broadening out from not just the financial services space, but broadening into all industries where the consumer safeguarding, consumer rights, consumer duty would take precedent in the compliance space for all other industries. And then the fourth prediction was around your traditional AML models becoming redundant, less relevant in this current day and age, in the current climate around moving from your typical typologies, moving into kind of your more digitalized age. So that was our four predictions, and yeah, we're going to talk through how each
You've got
of
good
them
memory.
fared.
You've got a very good memory. You can remember that, but you can't remember what time you've got to be at an airport for a flight. It's convenient.
Yeah, so the first one was the one I made. The reason why I'm putting this one first is because I've been surprised at maybe the lack of awareness or knowledge around this topic or this subject. So the first prediction is the increase in proliferation financing scrutiny. And you might actually question say, what's proliferation financing?
I was about to ask, not for me,
Yeah,
but yeah, for the benefit of others.
And funny enough, it's something actually I delivered a training session on about 2 weeks now for a number of compliance professionals, financial crime and AML specialists. And I was taken back by how little people actually knew about even what it meant.
Do you think it happened?
So if we take a look back into 2025, the predictions were made early in January 2025. And I think this is pretty much on the mark. If I was to assess myself on this, I'd probably give myself a 9 out of 10. I think it almost hit the nail on the head pretty much the month afters. We had the FATF set out their updated core principles and the recommendation of AML deficiencies and SS and AML risk within jurisdictions. And one of those key updates was within the risk-based approach that the core assessment had to include the risk of AML, risk of terrorist financing, but now also had to include the risk of proliferation financing. And that was in February 2025. So it's pretty much straight away there was updates in the requirements of the FATF on how industries, how regulators, how jurisdictions themselves need to understand proliferation financing.
But so then, based on that comment right there, do you think that the adoption of complying with proliferation finance was driven more by FATF alignment over geopolitical expectations? Like, where do you think it was purely because of FATF?
So, great question. My belief it's both. My belief that the foundation was set by FATF. Like I said, I had already seen it coming simply because interactions I was having with operations, with firms, seen the lack of understanding, but also seen the undertone coming from the regulatory bodies, legislative bodies. But no doubt the geopolitical tensions and instabilities in 2025 has accelerated that. So I think it's both. I think it was always coming, but the geopolitical tensions you've seen, the continuation of the conflict in, Russia and Ukraine, the heightened tensions we've had in the Middle East, the significant changes in governmental leadership across the world. We've got Mr. Trump in the USA, doing what he's doing. throughout 2025. So this has definitely accelerated it. So I think it's a combination of both.
So out of 10, what are you giving yourself in terms of, you predicted this would happen? Out of 10, how on the money do you think
Again, I say a solid 9. If we're looking specific, a solid 9. I think 9 is really good. I think a 9 out of 10. If we're looking at more evidence of where this comes from, is not only do we have FATF state this in their core standards update, but also in October in the plenary, their last plenary in October, their determination of countries which are high risk now doesn't just include, is not just AML and CTF deficiencies, it's also proliferation financing deficiencies. So that was the first time really they've defined proliferation financing in why a jurisdiction is rated as high risk. It's usually been their AML and their CTF deficiencies. That was the first time. So I think there was that. And then we had a number of webinars in June, July from the FATF, where again, explicitly it was discussed around proliferation financing and the need for not just a theoretical understanding, but an understanding which is applicable to the controls in the business.
So I would say that when it comes to the overall highest level of scrutiny and what is required, I'd actually give you a 10 because the FATF was spot on. But when it comes to actual independent regulators, their knowledge of what the expectations are, what they then need to set as expectations on the firms within their sectors, that's more like a 2.
Yeah.
And that's purely because I think FATF have been very, very clear. It's crystal clear in terms of this is what needs to be done. This is why you need to do it. And there's some steer on how firms, operators can do it. But in terms of actual businesses applying what measures they need to apply to comply with, the prevention or detection of proliferation financing, I don't see that. And I'm basing that on, this isn't just an opinion, from attending events throughout 2025, there were several round tables. And I remember being on one round table, and it was shortly after a FATF webinar or steering group. I can't remember what it was. And we sat on a round table, and there was all of these MLROs, AML managers from different industries. So there was a couple from gambling, a lot of financial services. And the level of understanding on what they needed to have within their risk assessments, what they needed to expect from their teams, and how, what measures they could place to comply with proliferation financing requirements, it was so inconsistent. There were some that had done a ton of work, really understood it, they trained their teams, and then when we started discussing, what specifically have you trained your teams on, what guidance have you provided, what's within your risk assessment, some of them had purely put, a line on there that it's now a requirement to consider proliferation financing, put a couple of extra lines on there to, jazz it up a little bit. That was it. There was no granular detail. Like when you compare it to specific anti-money laundering or terrorist financing, where those sections are broken down to, this is what we're looking for, this is how we look for it. Proliferation financing seemed really, really reliant on, well, we've got sanctions checks taking place, so we kind of tick that box. It just didn't seem like anybody knew what to do or how to do it. Yeah. And I think that's still the case right now.
I think you're 100% right. What I repeatedly saw in 2025 was firms still reacting intellectually but not operationally to proliferation financing risk. So what I mean by that is it's when there were updates from regulators, when there was updates from supervisory bodies, they would look at their risk assessment, they would update, they would refer to that updated guidance, but there would be no change materially to any sort of controls. And that means that there's still not an understanding principally on the shop floor, as we call it, on the first line of actually what level of exposure the company has to proliferation financing, because that changes right across industry. So you have the financial services where the industry where it's a more direct impact. You might be exposed to dual use good companies who produce microchips or produce some sort of laboratory technology or something like that, where they're wholly legitimate, but they could be used for proliferation purposes. Or you could be in an industry like the gambling sector, where it's indirect exposure, where it's more source of funds, where you're looking at a customer's source of funds to establish, the legitimacy of that. They might be linked to a dual use good a company, there might be a director of a dual use good company, and you won't really scrutinize that company in the level you need to, because there's not an understanding of actually what's the risk exposure here. So I think there's still, because the regulators haven't set the clear expectations that's being set from the supervisory bodies onto the jurisdictions, onto the regulators, hasn't been filtered down yet. So we're still at that stage of, because we haven't been asked to show the regulator what we do to assess our controls, we haven't thought about it. So it's just because the question hasn't been asked yet doesn't mean it's not going to be asked. And
I mean, everyone's able to show their answers, but not able to show their working out.
Yeah.
And that's where it's getting stuck.
That's a good one. And I think 2026 people will come unstuck, because they'll be able to show the answers, but they won't be able to show the working out, and then they will become unstuck. But I think, unfortunately, we're at that point where most firms, a lot of industries, are still waiting for that enforcement to happen. There hasn't been any explicit enforcement against lacks and failures in proliferation financing assessments. So until that day comes, I think a lot of firms, unfortunately, are still waiting for that to happen before they take decisive action or reactionary action.
We speak to a lot of businesses, especially in the gambling industry, and other than, the odd question during a compliance assessment, there isn't really a deep dive into how do you comply with proliferation financing. So do you think that will ramp up in 2026 then?
I do. I mean, I don't see the tensions, political tensions, subduing. You're seeing the narratives from most Western governments in terms of the security, their national security agendas ramping up. And then once legislation and governments filter down into regulation, ultimately it filters down into industries. So I think there definitely will be. And even you spoke about, sanctions, checks being the barometer for most companies of proliferation financing risk. But that's not proliferation financing risk assessing. It's literally assessing whether you can deal with a client or not, or customer or not. Actually, how you're assessing what that customer or that client is involved in terms of their own business, their own nature of their business. So that in the past, again, it's been something that has been used as a way of determining the risk of proliferation, or assessing someone's proliferation financing risk. But I think in 2026, I think that's over now. I think even most recently, we've seen publications where sanction screening is explicitly being referenced by legislation and regulators as not sufficient for assessing proliferation financing risk. So if that comes to an assessment, internal, external audit from a regulator, and that's what your rationale is to understanding your risks as we do sanction screening, that definitely won't cut the mustard.
I mean, it links into one of your other predictions. I can't remember if you mentioned it just then. I don't know if we're going to go over it, but was a decline in the traditional AML methods.
Yeah, we'll go.
We're going to go over.
Yeah, we'll go. Yeah.
Okay. Because I was going to say, like, that links in quite nicely. The fact that seems to be not a method for AML detection or prevention, but because it's part of the new age, people are maybe part of the reason why it's not been adopted fully. But we'll come on to that as one of your predictions.
Yeah. So this is not a marking your own homework. Again, this is more of an accountability piece. So I'm glad you gave me a 10 out of 10. I didn't give myself a 10 out of 10. I would have given myself an 8 out of 9, specifically purely because...
An 8 out of 9?
8 out of 10, sorry. 8 or 9 out of 10.
Okay.
Or 6, 7 out of 10.
Don't.
8 or 9 out of 10, purely because regulators haven't really enforced those requirements, those standards onto industries yet.
But we always say this: today's regulations are based on yesterday's failings.
Yep.
So we're not actually going to see the impact enforcement wise. It might not be 2026, because I think there still needs to be a little bit of leniency for operators, firms to fully adopt it, test their own measures, and go through that process. I think if we were to jump straight to somebody being on the receiving end of enforcement action, I think it would need to be, like you said, an industry that is directly, has the highest level of risk. Like, I think if you look at the gambling industry, who we work closely with, the risk of proliferation financing being prevalent is fairly low. But then if you look at, if you're in FX trading,
your payments,
then the risk goes higher. So I think the expectations and standards for them should be higher than it should be for the lower risk industries. So let's see what 2026 has. We'll come back in 2027 and see if you got that one right.
Yes. So that was the first prediction. So scored at a 9 out of 10.
Listen, so you don't mark your own homework. I've given you a 10 on that one. based on your specific prediction that the supervisory level and the regulatory level, and the highest level is FATF, that you would see higher expectations and clearer scrutiny. So on proliferation financing. So I'll give you a 10 on that.
Thank you.
Like I said, if you'd have said operators applying it or firms
yeah.
applying it, you'd have been way off.
You got a 2.
2 or a 1.
But yeah, so that was the first prediction, and we went on to the second predictions. I think it's going to be kind of a twofold challenge and change. I think the challenge or the change will be actually how compliance can utilize AI and machine learning to enhance, controls, can enhance compliance within industries. And then the second part will be the challenge of actually holding people accountable still, despite and being and having transparency despite the utilization of AI.
I think we've seen a lot of AI. I mean, it was quite an easy one to predict, I would say. So I cheated a little bit because at the start of 2025, we could see where AI was going to a certain point. We could see, right, hold on, this is no longer people going on ChatGPT and saying, draw me a picture of a cat. This is now people going on there and saying, well, imagine you're an anti-money laundering officer and I've asked you to write a risk assessment. What would you do? And getting like a full document from it. So we already saw a very sharp evolution. So I didn't expect that we would be at the level we are at right now. So even though I believe I got the prediction quite right in terms of the adoption, I never expected we'd be at the level we are now, where if you look at across the board, the way that AI is being used, all the way from, if you look within the gambling industry, there's companies that have very good AI systems in place for safer gambling, companies that have it for KYC, for fraud detection, for ongoing monitoring, transaction monitoring.
Yeah.
Then at the final end, you've got AI models that will review customer accounts, or that can review customer accounts for you, can spit out risk scores for you, can even write summaries of what action to take on accounts. You could almost replace an entire team with what AI can do. Obviously, you always need that human element. We've discussed this before. But I didn't think we'd be at that level by the end of 25. Mm-hmm. I thought we'd have made progress, but to be there or where we are now, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a near perfect prediction, and whilst I think you're doing yourself a disservice, because whilst there was a significant increase in the utilization of AI technology comparatively speaking to the year before, the way it's accelerated in this last year, 2025, is greater than even I would have imagined, and potentially most people would imagine. If you look at even taking it outside of the compliance space, most people in the Western world, most people in the world now use AI in everyday life. You have people creating images and videos of things which are artificially induced. And then you have, even my children's school now, I've gone to a parents' evening the back end of 2025. And there's an epidemic now where they're having to speak to parents about how we can help police the use of AI in our children's production of tasks and homework. And if you're looking at one of the key points you said was that the utilization of AI would move much faster than regulation. If you're looking at regulation, whilst there's been a phased approach in the EU's AI Act, it's very slow. It's been very slow in that phase approach, and I think the only jurisdiction in Europe with its own AI regulation is Italy, I think, at this present moment. And if you're looking at it globally, it's pretty much nothing. So I think it's a pretty near perfect prediction.
And I'll tell you one thing I've been really, really impressed with from compliance teams across every industry is that typically law enforcement businesses are a step behind criminals, right? Criminals figure out how to break laws and do things, and then we play catch up. With AI, obviously, deep fake evolved quite quickly for fraud purposes, and then we've seen a lot of criminal activity from the use of AI. But the speed at which both law enforcement agencies and then regulated businesses adopted AI to prevent, detect, and just be overall deterrence for how criminals could capitalize on AI has been so impressive. I don't think I've seen law enforcement and industries be that proactive on detection and prevention in any other scenario. I think if you if you go back, the last, say, 50 years, on when crime starts to rise up, nearly every single time we're a few years behind,
Yeah.
and then we start bringing in systems and measures.
Yeah.
But right now, from the discussions we've been having with various law enforcement agencies and the various publications that are made, we're doing such a great job. Touch wood, it continues, but they're doing such a great job. And that is another thing that I could not have predicted. I was thinking when AI started evolving the way at the speed it was, that criminals were going to take advantage of it and have 5 years
Yeah.
free reign of making millions off of it and ruining people's lives. But actually, whilst that is happening, it always happens, the level of application from law enforcement and regulated businesses has been spot on as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I'll talk a bit about that investment in machine learning and utilization of AI in law enforcement detection and models in that last prediction I give, because it kind of talks and addresses that. But I think the question I wanted to ask as a discussion point is, do you think there's any specific contributing factors to why the AI adoption has accelerated in the way it has in 2025, even beyond what you potentially would have thought it could? Either of us could have thought it would have been.
I mean, survival was a big part of it, right? Like, it's similar to, what's the saying UFC trainers teach: move or die. Move or die, survive, move or die. And in this case, when it comes to the adoption of AI, regardless of what business you're in, I think most people have had to take on some level of adoption and enhancing knowledge. But specifically in compliance and within the sectors that we work most closely with, gambling sector, I think if you were not one of the front runners, if you were not investing as a business and as an individual, not investing in yourself to enhance your knowledge of how can I use AI, or how can I help my teams to utilize AI so it can automate some of our workflows, so that we can speed things up, so that we can be more compliant, so we can manage risks. If you weren't taking advantage of this, amazing tool that we've never had the availability of before, then effectively you're going to die. You're not going to evolve with the times. And one of the things that I do now when I'm interviewing people or speaking to people, I'm asking them about their use and knowledge of AI. And it's not, a prerequisite to getting a job, but I want to know that you've invested in yourself, because if this is, something that is used and but is used quite heavily within compliance businesses and compliance teams, and you're not one of those people that's invested in yourself, for me, that's the same as, you don't understand the definition of AML. You should know that the same way you know how AI can benefit you and your teams. So I think a big part of it is a necessity, because if you didn't learn how to adopt it or use it in at least some capacity, you're going to be less appealing to the businesses that are future-proofing themselves.
Yeah. And then drilling it down a bit more specifically into the UK, do you think that the UK budget accelerated or forced the hands of any industries in terms of their utilization of AI? And if so, why?
You talking about
the UK budget? Yeah.
No, I don't think so. Not specifically. I think that budgets and financial constraints always speed up evolution. Obviously, so the budget would have had an impact, but I think regardless of what would have happened in the budget, the same evolution would have happened. Yeah, it might have sped up slightly because people were worried about, overheads. How much are we paying employees to do a certain task? Can we replace it? How many systems have we got doing various tasks? Can we use AI to do those tasks, as opposed to branching out to 3 or 4 different systems and spending X amount of money? So the budget specifically, no, but financial limitations, constraints always enhance evolution. So I just think that regardless of what would happen in the UK budget, teams and businesses would have taken on the adoption of AI at a rapid rate anyway, because it's a way of saving money, reducing risk, potentially enhancing skills and knowledge. So you would be naive not to do that anyway, regardless of the budget.
Okay. And then last question or last discussion, seeing as there isn't any sort of common standard because nothing's really been implemented across the board, when it comes to compliance, where does the accountability lie when it comes to utilization of AI in compliance?
At the moment, it's still self-accountability, right? Everyone is almost regulating themselves. And there needs to be, I think within businesses that we work within, so regulated businesses, the potential of them using it for, in the wrong way intentionally is very, very low. So I'm not too concerned about the fact that has to be a level of accountability on businesses and individuals.
More so, to cut you off, so more like, and in terms of the misuse of it, yeah, I agree, but more so, who is sense checking? So, for example, you're building out this AI technology to help you assess customer profiles. Who's sense checking the algorithms? Who's sense checking that the AI technology is not continuously hallucinating? We've seen that of time to time. So where does that accountability, does that collide with the engineering team, the technological team? Is it the compliance team? How's that accountability?
Most from discussions we've been having, most companies that have really taken on board and taken seriously the adoption of AI have brought in specialists to govern that process. So whether you're an AI strategist, they come in a range of different titles, and those individuals work closely with your DPO, with your compliance manager, with your technical compliance officers, the various teams, to make sure that whatever they're implementing, because regulation is so loose, is morally sound and complies with the other areas. So you can't just be uploading personal data because you've got to comply with GDPR. So most companies have done that. Where companies have tried to govern it themselves, I think a lot of it has been morally led or based on the surrounding regulations. Again, GDPR, AML regulations, security regulations. I think a lot of them have relied on that. But again, like we always say, and I said it about 5 minutes ago, today's regulations are based on yesterday's failings. Someone's going to get this wrong. And that was my prediction in 2025. And it's my prediction, going to be a prediction for 2026. Someone's going to get in a lot of trouble for their use of AI. Serious, serious trouble. Because I don't know if I can say it in a podcast, but people take the piss when they can. Businesses are out to make money. So you will always get one or two that divert from what's right and what we should be doing to what can we be doing. And those companies are the ones that are going to cost the rest of the industries that we work with in, because they're going to get it wrong, whether it's the way that they use customer data, whether it's the way that, they're using information, to really take advantage of marketing, etc. All of these things.
Manipulation of information, or
they're going to get it wrong. Yeah. And then there's going to be enforcement action, and they're going to clamp down, and they're going to say, well, look, we gave you this opportunity to do the right thing. You clearly couldn't do it as an industry. So therefore everyone's going to be punished. And now these are the rules. If you want to use AI for anti-money laundering, transaction monitoring, you can only use this tool when you've got to use it this way. So someone's going to get it horribly wrong. And there's going to be a bit of enforcement and fallout from it. And then we'll see the regulations start to tighten.
Are regulators, though, are regulators ready for AI-driven compliance at scale?
They're not, but once someone gets it wrong and there's impact on the public, they have no choice but to evolve very, very rapidly. If there is an incident like what we're discussing here, let's say somebody uses AI as a business in a wrongful way, there's going to be an impact, right? And you're going to get customers personally impacted. There's going to be complaints and financial impact. Those regulators within those sectors are going to have no choice but to say, right, we've got to do. They can't just leave it because they're not ready.
No choice but to be ready.
Yeah, they can't just say, right, we're not ready. They're going to have to say, right, we've got X amount of budget this year. We're allocating, X amount of millions to AI compliant or AI regulation. Hopefully, hopefully I'm wrong, and it's not somebody gets it as seriously, has a serious failing like I'm predicting, and it's the regulators don't clamp down that tightly. Because one thing, like I said, is the way that most businesses have adopted the use of AI is benefiting everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It is really benefiting, and it will be a shame that from a couple of people taking advantage and using AI the wrong way will cause an impact, but it is inevitable, unfortunately.
Well, this is a prediction we hope is wrong then, isn't it?
I mean, from my perspective, it's not one that I hope is wrong, because I do believe that regulation is necessary. And I know a lot of people will hate me for when I say that, but you cannot just trust businesses who are there to make money to always do the right thing. And not because they're bad people. It's not because they're doing things in an illicit way or you can't trust them. It's purely because their aim and the way that they survive is they want to make money and have to make money. Otherwise, shareholders pull out, customers stop using them, so they have to make money. And when that is on the line and you've got to protect all your employees to make sure you can pay their salaries, people push the limitations of what they can do. And it always comes down to, in a lot of business, it comes down to in some businesses, well, the regulation doesn't say we can't do that. So why don't we do it? And it's very rarely that someone says, well, you shouldn't do it just because it's the wrong thing to do, that prevents them from doing it. Because if a business can make, an extra 50 million profit this year by doing something that isn't forbidden just because it's not the right thing to do, some companies will do it. And it's horrible that that's the world we live in, but it is the world we live in nonetheless.
Yeah.
So regulation for me, especially when it comes to AI, is absolutely necessary. But I would hope that it's done in a way that it doesn't stunt evolution.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a 10 out of 10 from me to you. I think on that, I think, yeah.
I'm hoping that people comment and disagree with us.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just giving each other 10s out of 10.
No, I mean, I think I didn't give myself a 10. What did you give yourself on that prediction then?
I'll give myself a 10.
You give it?
I did because, it was adopted heavily. It's been used by nearly every single person, but you kind of saw it come in.
Yeah, no, I think the main reason why, like I said, is not only because it has been adopted and it has accelerated at the pace it accelerated at, it's because the regulation has pretty much been stagnant since the inception of AI. Hasn't been any sort of real implementation, and you would have thought that, given we had all me and you, and I'm sure many other people have seen the predicted scale of growth.
I mean, there's if you look at most regulators, especially in the UK, I would say those regulators, the FCA, Gambling Commission, done a good job in terms of, have they done enough? I don't know. But in terms of making clear, some of the boundaries, they've done a good job. If you look at the FCA, they have their sandboxing and they have their guidance on AI usage, and they have their, what was that thing they done when AI was adopted?
Supervisory, which one?
Yeah, the AI supervisory body, and it was all published within their newsletters. So they made it quite clear that, there are some boundaries, don't cross them. And if you look at the Gambling Commission as well, not only did they make it clear some of the boundaries, but they also put some guidance in there. If you're using AI, you need to be ready to explain your algorithms, how they're adopted, how they're used, who oversees them from a governance perspective. So you couldn't just go, right, we're going to put in this AI tool for monitoring KYC documents, because you would need somebody, at least one person in the business, that has knowledge on how that works. So in the UK, I mean, my knowledge unfortunately doesn't expand wide enough to know if that's the same with some of the, the US and other European regulators. But in the UK specifically, I think they've done a good job with some initial guidance and some initial boundaries, because now you have something that you should expect to get asked. If you're in the gambling industry and you've started using AI for something, be prepared to explain and evidence how you're governing that. And I think that's a very, very good immediate standard to set up, and quite quick from the regulator.
Yeah, that just gave me a light bulb for maybe a potential episode in the future, discussing kind of firms who have multi-jurisdictional operations and something like AI, where you have multiple jurisdictions, and potentially the expectations are different across different jurisdictions where you operate. How do you? Anyway, we'll go into that and later date.
So your next one?
No, yours is because I'm doing it in order of. I'm going to do it in order of how we discussed them. Okay. So if that's the order we're going to do it in, I think yours was next, which was the consumer duty one.
I got this so wrong.
I don't mean we didn't discuss this one. So one of the ones I've written down is, I think we're going to see in 2025 a tighter regulation around consumer duty. And it's going to move away from just, so at the moment, consumer duty is very much a financial services regulation. We see parts of it filtered over or taking different forms in other industries, like social responsibility, i.e. safer gambling. But I think we're going to see it move into other sectors in 2025.
Why do you think whilst I agree the prediction hasn't materialized fully, I think there has been some developments, but way slower pace potentially than what you predicted. Why do you think that has potentially been the case?
Because first of all, the areas where it did branch out a little bit, we saw a real big clampdown in retail and e-commerce on the pricing manipulation. So, for example, brands saying this used to be £800, it's now £400, which was often a lie and done in a manipulative way. We saw a real clampdown on that. Still not amazing, as we saw in things like Black Friday, where people really took advantage of that, and there was a lot of false advertising. But we saw a big clampdown on that. But everywhere else across the board didn't. And I think the main reason for that is because there are so many complaints that come from customers around it, to ombudsmen and to regulators themselves, that it's almost become a common practice that they receive these complaints, and it's part and parcel of the business. And I don't think they've invested heavily enough in having teams within regulators and ombudsmen to manage that and dive into where the big problem is and regulating it. I think there's just not an investment in that side of it, that from what I can see.
And then who makes that change? Do you think there's a potential for this to materialize at a faster pace if regulators do so, or is it a case that it's going to be status quo moving forward?
When it comes to consumer duty, there's not going to be an adoption of doing what's right unless the regulator pushes it. So I don't think we're going to see it speed up. I'm not going to have a prediction of 2026 that things are going to get any better, because outside of e-commerce and retail, I mentioned that I would hope, and I was anticipating that in utilities we'd see, consumer duty applied, with the way that energy and utility companies make so much money off the back of ruining people's lives, impacting people's lives, that people can't afford to switch on gas, electricity, etc. But then they're getting billions in profits. My hope and expectation was we'd see a clamp down on that, that start protecting the public. I think it just it's filling too many people's pockets, and I'm quite blunt about that.
Are we seeing regulators and industries implementing greater levels of consumer duty without calling it that? Like they're calling it whatever else. Do you think that could be partly? Because I'm looking at stuff like social media, adult entertainment. There's a lot of additional safeguards going into how we preserve our customers and consumers.
That's a really good point, and hadn't considered that. The age restrictions on porn and things like that, which came in that was 2025.
Yeah.
Things like they are good, and they're talking about now social media restrictions for under 16s. Those things are really, really good. So on that point, are we seeing elements of consumer duty ramping up? Maybe I'll take back what I said and don't give myself a 2, and maybe it's a 4 based on those measures. But I think that those are easy, quick wins. You should have age control for porn. You should have social media restrictions for under 16s, because that stuff should just be common sense. The same way alcohol has age limitations, gambling has limitations. For me, that should just be common sense, because the level of harm is clearly evidenced. So, but it's the other parts, again, like I said before, when it comes to utilities, because there's not enough talk about the harm that it causes, or it's just, really played down by the media. It doesn't seem to have an impact. Whereas, with social media for under 16s, perfect example, there is so much talk. And then there was that Netflix film series, Adolescence,
yes,
which showed that, the use of social media and social communications between teenagers, what impact that can have. Same with porn. Everyone knows the impact that can have on young minds. You almost need that in things like utilities. You need, like hundreds of thousand people to not be able to turn on their water and then, die of dehydration. You almost need there to be harm for them to take action. But because there doesn't seem to be enough shouting about it or enough evidential impact being portrayed, even though we know it's there, nothing gets done for it. But you made some good points there. I agree. I forgot about especially the porn and now the under 16s for social media, which I really do hope comes in.
Yeah, they were pushing for that halfway through the year in terms of, managing use, because I think we got into halfway through the year, and there was a lot of content around different things going on in the world, the geopolitical tensions, and a lot of content was going out, and a lot of graphic content going out, which was obviously impacting minors who had access to social media, and I think that was a push from there, and I think that's why, like you're saying, because it's being shouted about, by parents, and rightly so.
So
That
if stuff is not in the media
Yeah.
or is played down in the media, it doesn't get the attention it needs. And I
Yeah.
think part of the reason the whole, the porn age restrictions came in is because you had all of these OnlyFans models coming out with all of their millions that they're making from doing horrific things, or maybe not horrific things, or what do you want to call it, like discussing things to their bodies, to themselves, publicizing it about all this money that they're making. The impact that has on, I've got teenage kids, that just wasn't an issue when we were younger, right? You didn't have porn stars going out talking about, look, I made 50 million this month, and how that can corrupt a young mind. But then they'll say, well, you can't let a 15-year-old play Grand Theft Auto. But then they have access to pornographic
access,
videos.
right?
Yeah,
Access.
So I think that there needs to be shouting. There needs to be a public reaction for any action to actually take place by regulators and governments.
Yeah. So I gave this prediction a 4 out of 10.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
I think what I saw is, whilst there wasn't any explicit, consumer duty will move across and loud regulatory implementation across industries, I did see quite subtle changes. Like you said, we mentioned the age restrictions on the adult industry. We saw a lot of talk around greater consumer protection on social media, TikTok, Snapchat, these other platforms where you could take a picture of somebody or find location. All these things were requiring firms to have greater control on safeguarding their clients, their consumers, their customers. So that's why I gave it a 4 out of 10.
I'll take a 4. You're really being generous there, so I'll take it. So, right, let's move on then to your last one, which was the decline of traditional AML models.
I think we are going to see a shift away from talking about financial crime and AML as placement and layering and integration, and it goes back into kind of this move into the digital age. Money is becoming more digital, and the whole concept of placement, layering, and integration is focused on physical cash and the movement of physical cash. It was actually based on that the case of the drug cartel and how they kind of moved money. I think we're going to see a move away from that to actually utilizing and understanding blockchain to assess money laundering risks, to train around real-time monitoring, real-time assessment of actually the interaction of individuals or interactions of entities and interactions of services, rather than actually the concept of actually somebody placing it here, so somebody layering it here. I think this one was a quiet success. I think whilst it wasn't again explicit in regulation that it was, we are moving away from the placement, layering, and integration models of money laundering. I think it was very, very clear from enforcement action. How many times did we see enforcement action in various industries, specifically in the gambling sector, where it was made very clear that financial thresholds can no longer be used as the barometer of assessing the customer's risk level. We have to be looking at behaviors. So the behavior is tied to that. So, behavior models, looking at the risks linked to networks that a client or consumer or customer is associated to. We saw, the Serious Fraud Office and other enforcement bodies, HMRC, invest heavily into AI and machine learning technology. We've seen, a requirement for greater blockchain analysis. And if you're looking at, some of the case studies that were done by the NCA over 2025, a lot of them involved in, following blockchain data, ledgers and stuff like this, rather than just, I know that still is, following the money, but the way they're doing it is not in your typical placement, layering and integration model. So
I'm going to interrupt you there, because when we speak to firms, operators, etc., a lot of them still have within their training internally within teams. You look at the either the e-learning that they have in their companies or the actual face-to-face training they deliver. Still, placement, layering, integration, they still have all those old school techniques, which seem to be just standardized. Why are they still being used then if there's been a slight move away?
I believe it's because we are teaching AML history rather than teaching AML reality.
Okay.
And this is it. I think even myself, when I have to go and have some refresher learning, I think we even talked about this in back in the 2025 around training and development and how this needs to evolve. Then you're back from your tick box, from your e-learning into kind of practical application of what we're seeing in the real world and making it interactive and based on real life scenarios. And I think a lot of it is still based on number one, AML history, and number two, the lack of confidence in those training bodies, in those compliance or AML leaders to really drill down into these new methods. So, how many AML experts are experts in blockchain? How many AML experts are expert in in behavioral led data analytics? How many AML experts are experts in AI and machine learning? So I think we're at that crossroads, which I said again in 2025. We're at that crossroads now where we need to really looking at training and understanding financial crime, because again, it's not just AML now, it's financial crime. That's including fraud, that's including sanctions, that's including proliferation financing, that's including terrorist financing, and really rebuilding how that looks in 2026 as we are now and into the future, based on the fact that this is we're in that digital age now. So that's why I think we're at the moment teaching AML history more often than teaching AML reality.
But doesn't the AML history form what is the reality?
If it evolves, so the AML history no longer is no longer the reality. So it has, the AML history has caused the evolution of where AML is today, and it's been a cause for where we are today, but it's not where we are today. So there is still, don't get me wrong, there still is residual financial crime being conducted in that way, and there will be for the foreseeable future, but there's a lot more financial crime models, typologies, which lie outside of that typology, that if you don't understand that, you're going to be missing a lot of financial crime risk.
So what can operators, firms do to make sure that their training, their guidance, their policies, procedures, risk assessments, etc., are more based around the reality of AML as opposed to the history of AML? So right now, someone listens to this and they're thinking, well, actually, my training still talks about placement, layering, integration. My policy still doesn't even reference proliferation financing too much. What can they do right now to ensure that they have evolved with what is the current reality?
The first and foremost thing I believe that needs to be done is to look at your specific business or the specific industry you're training out and understanding what is normal behavior in that company, in that industry, and what is abnormal behavior. And that is taking into consideration stuff like payments, instant payment patterns, behavioral patterns, network flows, and really building out the training around this, rather than just if you see somebody place into the situation and lay out and do this and do that and then integrate, that's the cycle of money laundering or terrorist financing complete or proliferation financing complete. Is really looking at and understanding the norms and understanding what is abnormal, and then building those out into each specific areas, which is kind of what the risk assessment is supposed to do, but really do it in the way it was designed to be done. So looking at today's instant payments, 5-10 years ago, how frequent were instant payments in the way they're now? 5-10 years ago, how predominant was blockchain technology? So we're not even just talking about cryptocurrencies here. A lot of traditional financial markets now use blockchain technology in their day-to-day operations. How prevalent were different types of networks? You have your mule networks, but now we have loads of different types of trade-based networks and different types of financial crime-based networks because of digitalization, because of globalization. So you can have a network of criminals, one in Taiwan and one in the United States, and they work really closely together because of digitalization, because of globalization. And that's where we are in 2026, where we weren't in 2010, 2011, 2008, 9, 14, where really this placement layer integration model was formed from.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think, you said it, you were talking about how many AML experts are, knowledgeable on proliferation finance, how many AML experts are knowledgeable on blockchain analysis, etc. I think the fact is there are too many self-proclaimed AML experts. That's what the conclusion is. You can't go on to a conference these days, or you can't, go on LinkedIn without hearing someone say, within a business, this guy here in my team is an AML expert and he's going to teach you about this, or come and listen to this panel because we've got so-and-so who's an AML expert. And then you go and hear them speak and they're talking about the dinosaur tactics and methodologies that you just referenced there, as opposed to what's currently going on, because most people know all of that. So you get very few opportunities to hear from people who I would consider to be AML experts. I don't think there are enough of them who are up to date with trends, techniques.
You got to keep, one of the things I always advocate is learning. You got to keep learning, even if you believe you know a lot, believe you are a specialist or expert in something. You got to keep learning because things are evolving. So even for myself, I put myself out there. I'm on a panel in the coming months discussing AI technology in AML and in compliance, and in order to do so, I have to go away and spend time learning that. So if I'm going to go train out AML and I want to be true to the people I'm training, it's training them out in terms of AML now. You then have to go away and invest the time in understanding blockchain, understanding behavioral models, understanding data analytics, because this is the way we are moving in the future. And like I said, you have the law enforcement agencies, SFO, NCA, HMRC in the UK, and I'm sure across the world investing in the same training, in the same understanding as well, that we're moving away from that into this. So I'm conscious of the time now.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, there are too many people, and what you shouldn't ever do, you can't spend time training other people if you don't spend time training yourself. Because like we're saying here, you're if somebody's a proclaimed expert and then they go and train people, actually then they're now only learning a fraction of what they should need to know in this day and age. But yeah, you were saying we're wrapping up.
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of ask a couple of questions. I know you used to do this quick fire thing, but based on our predictions, I wanted to ask you one question, which was, what is the one risk that you think firms are still ignoring the most, potentially out of the predictions we made? Or actually, we'll leave that for the next episode, because we're going to do another episode next time,
2026,
which will be our 2026 prediction. So what one risk do you think firms are still ignoring based on those predictions we gave in 2025?
Still?
The most, sorry. But
we didn't talk about what risks people are ignoring.
Those predictions come with risk, right? So if you're gonna, if you're ignoring the proliferation financing risk, if you're ignoring the AI requirements and compliance, if you're ignoring your consumer duty obligations,
that's an easy one then. Proliferation financing.
Okay.
In terms of what a firm's still ignoring and not doing enough to adopt and to detect and prevent, definitely proliferation financing, because I think genuinely that the knowledge is just not there, and there's almost been this reaction of, okay, we've got to make sure we consider proliferation financing. Well, how do we do it? We'll put it in the risk assessment that we check for A, B, C, and D. And then there's no real evidence. There's no regulator so far really clamping down on it. So I don't think, so that's an easy one for me. That's top of the list. I would love to see more firms taking it seriously. And that all starts with their risk assessment, like you said.
Amazing. So
what do you think? One for you. Go on, make it quick.
So I think my one would be the last one, my last prediction, which was the lack of awareness, or the lack of understanding that the AML typologies of yesterday are no longer relevant for today or moving forward. So I think there's not enough being done in building in greater depth of understanding and expertise around the current and the future models of financial crime risk. And that's where I think, because whilst proliferation financing is one key factor, we're talking about how to identify all financial crime risks. And I think they're for the future. And I think that's where we're still, most firms are still happy to go down the, your typical e-learning, or maybe one classroom-based session a year, which is still based on your 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12 typologies.
Yeah. Spot on. I agree. We'll wrap it there.
Yeah.
Good start to 2026.
It is indeed. So look out for the next episode, guys, because we will be going...
Why's your voice gone so loud?
One of the future episodes soon, that we'll be going into our predictions for 2026 and seeing how we fare in those predictions for the compliance space. One thing we forgot to do at the start of the episode was to just continue to ask for your support in this episode, in this podcast. We have been thrilled, as Alex said earlier on, in the engagement we had through 2025, and we're just asking you to continue to support us in this journey by liking, by commenting, by subscribing, and turning on your notification bells for each and every episode. And like Alex said again, we are available on socials, YouTube, LinkedIn, most social media platforms, TikTok as well now, and get in touch with us there, guys, if you want any specific type of content discussed, and if you again feel like you would like to contribute to the podcast. So thank you very much for listening, for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, guys.